So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the third annual Irene Casteel Endowed Speech. Before we begin our keynote, I want to thank several people that made this possible. I'd like to thank Dean Stacey Bretz from the Getty College of Arts and Sciences for her support through our series of lectures. I'd also like to thank Sean Stevens, who is the administrative assistant for the Department of Art and Communication, Luke Sheets, who is the director of the School of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, Dr. Jeff St. Onge, who is the department chair of Art and Communication, the Committee of Cultural and Special Events, who gave us funding to do this speech, and the Northern Review and the editor-in-chief, Gabe Ott, for providing the recording of today's lecture. It is my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Connell, who is a board-certified psychologist and the co-founder of HealthQuest Innovative Therapeutics and Geeks Like Us. She is the author of Tabletop Role-Playing Therapy, a Guide for the Clinician Game Master, the first published book on applied use of tabletop games in therapy. She has been featured on NPR, the BBC, the CBC, and Time Magazine, which if you've not picked up the edition of the anniversary of Dungeons & Dragons, I encourage you to do so. And she was recognized by all of these media outlets for her work using tabletop role-playing games in therapy. A U.S. Army veteran, Dr. Connell serves on the board of CrossCall, a 501c3 charitable organization that seeks to bring veterans together through gaming. She's also an expert in working with women and girls on the autism spectrum. She speaks nationally on the use of tabletop gaming in therapy and has been a distinguished guest speaker at several universities, including ours. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Irene Casteel.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to do a quick swap of the chords here. Hey, all right. So tonight we're going to be talking about what applied gaming is, how it's used, and how we can use gaming to help us build empathy. So a quick disclaimer, I do receive royalties from the book that I wrote, but I'm going to mention several games and products in here that I don't have any affiliation with. I just really love gaming and I love all of the different parts that are affiliated with it. Anytime there is a conflict of interest though, I will try to make you aware of that. So what are we going to be talking about tonight? So I want to give a basic understanding and define why gaming is so important for us to participate in. Gaming is something that is universal and it is important to understand a bit of why. We're going to talk about research on engagement with narratives can help to build our empathy, and then how we can utilize different communication devices to help ensure that people feel comfortable and safe talking about topics that might be difficult for them at the table. So just a really quick overview of what we're going to be talking through, but we're going to cover all this, so for time, we're just going to move on. So first off, what exactly is a game? When doing work like this, you start off with just the understanding of what something is, but then defining your terms becomes incredibly important. So in my book work, I use the definition from Jewel 2003, talking about how it is an activity that people engage in where they have a clear objective that they find desirable. And so we're going to work together to achieve that objective. Whether that objective is put a ball in a basket more times than the other team, whether it's go around a Monopoly board and get all the money, we've had that objective and we're finding it desirable. Now, a lot of times we might think that games need to be fun because they are a form of play. But interestingly, sometimes they're not, but they are still a game. So it's something important to understand that you can be playing a game, specifically a certain tabletop gaming games that you will play, where by the end of it, pretty much everybody's crying and having a very deeply emotional experience. It is still a game though, so even though people who are in that setting won't say that was fun, they will say it was memorable, it was enjoyable. But they are a form of play. And something very important to remember is that we do play across the lifespan. Just how we play changes. Now, something that's important to remember too, that as adults, a lot of times we need an alibi in order to feel as though we have permission to play, permission to have fun. Part of this is because in our culture, we view play as something only children do. And so if you are a highly educated person, it's seen as almost a threat to your social status to engage in play. And so we create these alibis for play. So this could be something like, well, no, I don't actually want to play softball. I'm just on the team as a way to build camaraderie with my coworkers, and we were raising money for charity. If that wasn't there, of course I would play. Come on now, right? Or I enjoy playing this game with my kids because I'm trying to be a good parent. It's not that I actually enjoy playing the game, right? So we create these alibis to give us an excuse to play, but really, we all play and we need to play. And so I would encourage people, especially those who are of high authority, to embrace play and embrace just being in a state of play. So another term, and something that's very important about gaming, is this concept that we call the magic circle. And so this is this imaginary barrier between where the rules of the day-to-day apply versus the rules of the game. Being in the magic circle allows us to behave in different ways than we can normally. So we can talk in silly voices, we can be a little bit more goofy, we can even do things that might be not allowed by society outside of the magic circle. So for example, if I put on a padded glove, walk down the main street and punch somebody in the face, I'm gonna get arrested for assault, right? If I do the exact same activity though, inside a boxing ring, I'm fine, because I'm in the magic circle of the boxing ring. The magic circle gives us this permission. It also tells us what to expect when we are in that situation. Something that's really interesting is of a survey of 1,600 people who identify themselves as people who play board games, 7% of that population were on the autism spectrum. This is really notable because of the general population, only 1% is on the autism spectrum. And so one of the reasons that we think folks on the autism spectrum might enjoy playing games more is because of the magic circle. It gives the rules for socializing. Everybody is, again, with that definition that we have from Joel, that it's a shared objective. We understand what's going on, we understand what's expected of us. And so that stress that we can feel in social interactions goes down, right? Because it's, there's this misconception that folks on the autism spectrum don't want to socialize. They very much so do, very much so want to make friends. But picking up on nonverbals, picking up on social cues can be very challenging. And so when you're in a situation where it's very clear what the rules are, how we're going to engage and what we're going to do, it decreases anxiety and can increase engagement. And that's more research on magic circle stuff. So there's lots of different types of games out there that we can play. So traditional board games is where we have some sort of board or general place where the game is happening. Right? So we're moving pieces on a board, we're manipulating things. Board games are several different types. We can have worker placement games, kind of what my kids would call racing games like Sorry or Monopoly. We can have cooperative games, strategy games, deck building, and so on. Card games are games where we just utilize a deck of cards to play the game. So this can be utilizing any deck of 52 playing cards to play something like poker or gin, or building specific decks such as a Pokemon trading card game or Magic the Gathering. Party games are games that are designed for a larger number of people to play together to create shared enjoyment, right? To break the ice, have something fun to do at your party, rather than everybody awkwardly standing around not knowing what to talk about. And then what we're going to focus on are tabletop role-playing games, which are narrative games where everybody works together to tell a story. All right, so in a tabletop role-playing game, you're going to have two types of players. You're going to have the game master, who is the narrator of the story. They're sometimes called the storyteller, the narrator, the dungeon master. There's a few other terms too. Generally, I'll use the term game master for this. And then you have the other players. And so we create an imaginative world that we all agree upon, and the player characters create characters that live and exist within that world. And then the game master's job is to create the narrative and control the other characters that exist within that world that interact with the player characters. And so through that cooperative engagement, we build a story together. There's a few very important things, though, in a role-playing game. They do, according to several studies, they really require that they be immersive, meaning that you feel very engaged, very connected to the story, to the narrative. If we're looking at tabletop role-playing games versus video games that are role-playing games, that's probably one of the biggest differences there. When we're playing a role-playing game, we're really in the headspace of the character that we are playing. We're thinking about them. We're thinking about their desires, their goals. When we are playing a video role-playing game, we're in the headspace of that character, or of ourselves, right? And we want to explore the world. We do the things that we want to do in the game, rather than the activities that our character in that game wants to do. And so that immersive piece is very important. Another part is that we have player agency. When we're talking, again, video games versus tabletop games, the code of video games is something that is known. Every option that you have has to be pre-thought out and pre-coded into the game. In a tabletop role-playing game, the code is your imagination. It's whatever you can think of, you can try. You might not be successful at it. In fact, a lot of times you won't be successful, but that's okay. You can try anything. You can be incredibly creative with how you use the resources that you have within the game. And then the final bit is that you have meaningful interaction with the world. That the actions your characters take actually drive the narrative forward, they actually change the world. And so your actions have power, they have meaning. You can feel that impact that you have. And there's something very powerful about sitting at a table with 4 of your friends and telling a story where you get to really make an impact on the community. You get to really change something in the world. That feels really good to play. In my book, this was the definition that I came up with and talked about, just because, again, everybody had a different definition of what a tabletop role-playing game was. And so, again, it's a game in which a player is controlling a character that lives within the agreed-upon gaming world and has narrative control over the actions of their character. So as we get into playing tabletop role-playing games, we look at the pillars of play. So there's 3 basic ways that we play and interact in these games. The first is that we engage in role-playing. And so what this is us having discussions in character with one another or with the non-player characters in the world. So me as the dungeon master, I might narrate that the players are walking into a pub and they'll go, oh, I'm going to go up to the barkeep and be like, hello, barkeep, what do you have? And then my job is to respond like, well, we've got mud and we've got some water because we got robbed yesterday, so take your pick, right? And that's role play. That's where we have the interactions back and forth. The next bit is exploration. So this is where we go out and we learn about the world. This is where you're picking up on what the cultures of the world are, the customs of the different places that you're traveling, exploring old ruins, kind of going on archaeological explorations. A lot of fantasy settings take place in some form of post-apocalypse, whether it's recent or very far in the past. And so finding ancient relics and learning about ancient technologies and people who came way before you and that are lost to time is a really big cornerstone of it, and that's that exploration piece. And again, it builds that immersive experience that you're engaging in a world that is living and breathing. And then the final is conflict or combat. So this is where you are fighting monsters or you're just engaging in some sort of challenge. When I'm doing these therapeutic games, I have a lot of folks who are asking me, really, like going and fighting a troll is therapeutic? It most definitely can be. It can be incredibly impactful for folks. It can help you feel powerful, but also it's a chance to see different ways to solve problems. I work with some kids who have impulse control problems, and we broadcast a lot of things in there to be like, don't pick a fight here. This is a bad idea to pick a fight. And then if they do anyway, they get to see the consequences of their actions. And we can talk about how to pick up on the clues that are around. And then as the game master, because I control the whole world, if I want to, I can rewind time and let them try again. Right? So it's about kind of learning how to overcome different obstacles that are in your way. Sometimes that is with your broadsword, and sometimes that's with your brain. So let's talk a little bit about why does gaming matter so much? There is no culture on Earth that exists that doesn't have games. It seems to be an incredibly human experience. The sociologist John Higsa actually argues that we should be called Homo laden, man the player, because gaming and playing is so important to us. So different cultures have their different sports and tabletop games that they will play. And again, we have that need for play. Games are not just for children, they are vital during our entire lifespan. They are ways for us to connect with one another, with our culture, with learning and just to have, again, to have fun for itself, which should be enough. And again, the more intentional we are with our use of games, it can really help us build skills across the lifespan. I'm working on my second book right now, which is actually exploring board games and how we can use board gaming to help us with a wide array of skills. Like several folks in my home have ADHD, and learning impulse control, learning how to think through things, can be very difficult. And so gaming can be a really wonderful way for them to practice those skills and to work on what they need to do to stay organized and to, wait patiently to do something. Gaming serves many, many functions for us. So it can teach information, right? The purpose of games like Candyland is to teach color, right? Doesn't actually have any strategy involved with it. Looking at different trivia games as well that can teach us about the world that we live in. We can have learning and problem-solving games, so puzzle games, things like that, to teach problem-solving and strategy as well. So strategy games, chess, war games, a lot of cooperative games can fall into this as well. So I think I did put cooperative games as their own. One of the things I like about cooperative gaming is you have to have a diverse group skill set. And you have to figure out how to utilize that diverse skill set to the greatest effect to get to your shared outcome, to get to your shared goal. Gaming also teaches us about the culture that it's in, right? So again, games are part of every culture and they communicate information about that culture, right? So my quick example of this is what's the most popular board game through history in Europe? Chess, yeah, great. And what's the objective of chess? Conquering, right? And what has been incredibly important in European history? Conquering, right? War and conquering. So the games that we play teach us about the cultures that we are in. All right, and then what I really want to focus on though is how gaming can build empathy. So empathy is our ability to understand the emotional experience of another person. It's our ability to sit with them and hear their story and not necessarily completely understand, but understand everything they're going through. Be like, I can understand how that would feel. I can understand that would hurt. I can understand that you would feel powerless, right? And so it is a skill set that we can learn. I think there's been this kind of idea for a long time that empathy is either something you have or something you don't have. And that's not accurate. It is something that can be taught. It's something that we can learn. Now, interestingly, reading fiction is a great way to build your empathy. That those who read fiction actually score higher on empathy measures than those who don't. And you gain more empathy if you identify with the character more. So if you're reading a story and you really greatly identify with the main character, you are going to have larger gains in empathy. And so even though we don't have research on this, I think it is not unreasonable to imagine that a character that you create, that you have narrative control over, and that you get to experience week after week in a campaign, which is the overall story that you tell in a role-playing game, that you're going to have even greater gains in empathy. And I think I want to kind of stress this for a quick moment, that I think this is one of the most important things here, because there's a lot of times where we're missing each other in today's culture. We're not taking the time to really understand where other people are. We're not taking time to empathize and to imagine what it must be like to be in someone else's shoes. And so I really think taking time to intentionally ground yourself into another's experience can be incredibly helpful. And so in role-playing games, there's a few different mechanisms that I think help build empathy. Right? So the first is a term called, commonly called bleed in the culture of role-playing games and LARPing. In my book, I put the term emotional permeability because I'm a clinician and I write clinical notes. And if I write in my clinical note that somebody experienced amazing bleed tonight, that's going to look really bad. So I had to create a term that could still capture this, that was a little bit more clinical. So bleed is the term that is used as emotions and experiences move between the player and the character that they are controlling. So bleed in is from the player to the character, right? So an example example of this would be, I've had a really bad day. Traffic was terrible, I woke up way too early, didn't get good sleep, and I just feel grumpy. And I'm playing in a game where my character is in a really good spot. We just had a really good mission that just finished really well. We're all feeling good, we're all feeling like victorious. But I'm playing my character as though they are very grumpy because I'm grumpy, right? So that is bleed in, from me to my character. Bleed out is the opposite, it goes from the character into the player. So this might be where the characters were in a really difficult fight, and it doesn't look like we're going to win, and then at the last moment we do get that win, and we get this rush of adrenaline and this really great victorious feeling. Like, I have done nothing aside from roll dice, but it feels the same. It feels as though I had that experience, and so that's the bleed out, the character to the player. And so again, I call it emotional permeability just because it is a little bit better for clinical reasons. Bleed is easier to say. I do better with visuals, so quick visual here. Now, this seems to be one of the main mechanisms where we can gain empathy and where we can gain, that growth that we're looking for. So, Dr. Still, I'd love to pick on you for a quick second.
Sure, everyone does that, which is fine.
All right. Can you tell me about a character moment that you've had in playing a TTRPG?
Yeah, because I normally play with clinical psychologists as well. We used to do a group every 2 weeks, and one of the things that was a big lead moment for us was we had a major battle which was under the sea. We had a bubble that was protecting us, and because I suggested to the wizard to hit a fireball, the bubble that was protecting us kind of disappeared, and we were getting rushed with water. And we tried to save everyone, and one of my friends' characters died.
Mm-hmm.
And we were dealing with the ramifications of that as the players to try to no, we're going to save you, we save you. And the player that wanted to do it said, no, I'm just going to rebuild my character. So they were less attached, but we were as a group trying to save a character that the player didn't really care about.
That's amazing. Well, and so notice something though in your narrative, right? You didn't talk about, so you didn't say the character cast requirements. I did this. I did this thing.
Right.
Now, clinical psychology in that you are not detached from reality. You understand that you're throwing funny math rocks around and telling a story, right? So it's not that we're having, in the early 80s during the Satanic Panic, there was fear that playing these games would loosen one's sense of reality, connection to that. And that doesn't seem to be at all what happens. In fact, it seems to be the opposite. We have a couple of case studies that do demonstrate that it actually can help with grounding reality. But our brains get a little confused, right? So if you've ever had a dream where you did something, and it can almost feel as though you actually have done that thing when you wake up, right? You imagine that you were taking a test or driving a certain route, and it's it feels like you've done it already. It feels like rehearsal, right? And so the same thing is true here, where we can rehearse these things. We can rehearse, being in a difficult situation. We can rehearse or practice, just different situations that we might have. And so this seems to be where we can have a lot of gains in empathy. And it is that experience of being in somebody else's shoes. For somebody who's felt powerless, right? To have a character that feels powerful. Or for maybe somebody who has never really had challenges in their life, to have things go wrong and to understand what that's like even when your best intentions are there and things don't happen. It starts to build those experiences that help us build empathy. Another part that might be at work here is narrative frames. So when we're playing tabletop role-playing games, we have to hold 3 different frames of play at the same time. By the way, I do big calls to research when I'm talking about this topic because not enough research has been done. This study, yes, 1983. It is the largest study to date that has been done on tabletop role-playing games. That was over 40 years ago. D&D's just celebrated its 50th anniversary. And we are very behind on doing research on this. So anyway, Gary Allen Fine, what he found with people playing was there was the frame of the player. So that's understanding yourself. I am at the table, I am rolling dice, I am here, I want the chips that are over there, pass them to me. Then there is the frame of the rules. So that's knowing what the rule set is. I want to do an intimidation check against this character, so I'm going to roll a 20-sided die. I'm going to add my intimidation modifier to that and describe that roll and describe how that went. And then there is the frame of the character that you have in the world that is existing within that world. And so again, I do better with visuals. So here we are. If we have frame confusion, if we're not able to hold these three frames, the game can't happen. The game tends to fall apart. Sometimes in bad ways. More that I've seen is funny ways. Because what will happen a lot of times is a player might be confused on something in the world, and their character would understand this, but the player doesn't, and so it creates some confusion. If you want a really good example of frame confusion, there's a very famous story in the D&D world called the Dread Gazebo. It's very, very, this one, it's very funny. But going through these can really help us understand what's going on. Even though I'm talking just about building empathy and playing the games, let's talk real quick about the therapy side of how we use this in therapy. Is really having that distinction between the character and the player. When there are undesirable behaviors happening at the table, I give that to the character. I go, wow, your character's being really rude right now. What do you think's going on with that? But if there's good behaviors that I really want the players to encourage, and I give that to the player, being able to go, man, you really handled that negotiation well. You really read the room, you saw the situation, you saw where you had advantage, and you really read that well and you're doing well. The difference between having that differentiation, having that ability to have the avatar and that emotional distance from things seems to be where we can get a lot of the growth and development that can happen. It also gives us a safe way to talk about what's going on, right? So if someone's feeling maybe uncomfortable or feeling like the other players at the table might be rejecting them, they can say, well, my character is feeling slightly rejected right now because of X, Y, Z. And then we can talk across the table, not in character, we're just talking to each other about, okay, how can we help this character feel more welcomed? And a lot of times that helps the player feel more welcomed as well. So when we're talking about empathy as well, there's also certain games that are actually designed to talk about emotional content. So One Child's Heart, this one here, you will actually take on the role of helpers in a child's life and get to go into their mind and help them work through a traumatic experience. So you get to take on the roles of educators, social workers, psychologists, I think foster parents as well. And you're working to help this child. It's a very heavy topic, but it is something else that can give us these experiences outside of what we might expect. So these role-playing games aren't all medieval fantasy. They can be lots of different situations. So when we're talking about doing games like One Child's Heart, though, we want to make sure that we have consent, that people know what they're signing up for, right? Because if everybody thinks they're coming to go and fight the trolls on the bridge, and then we're going to go into abusive memories for a child, that's a little different, right? So we want to have consent. And something else that we want to do when we're especially tackling some of these topics that are a little bit more uncomfortable, a little more difficult to talk about, is what's commonly called safety tools, but I'm wanting to kind of rebrand to communication devices. In my book, I did call them safety tools, but I think communication devices is a better tool for what they are, because it's about us being able to communicate not just when we're feeling unsafe, but when we're feeling a bit uncomfortable or we're just not having fun, if that's the purpose of the story, and that we want to have fun.
Can you tell us, when you're talking about using these in therapy, are you working with teenagers, adults? You mentioned people on the autism spectrum.
Yep.
How would you describe the profile of the people that are in your therapy sessions?
So my groups, I don't get to run them anymore because I get to do amazing things like this. My former group is meeting right now and is playing right now. So someone else is running it. But I ran groups for women and girls where we were focused on learning assertive communication, building positive peer relationships, and creative problem solving through play. I've definitely also run groups though specifically for folks on the autism spectrum to increase social skills. I've known other folks who are working on ADHD, depression, anxiety. My groups have been for middle and high school groups. I have run adult groups, but getting adults to show up for their own therapy is a really big challenge. They will move heaven and earth to be there for their children, but have a hard time showing up for themselves. So when we're talking about communication devices, it's evolved over time. So the first safety tool that was ever used was lines and veils. This was developed in the 1980s. This was response to people being weird at the table and wanting to have their characters have sexy time, and other people not liking it. And so what they created was this idea of lines and veils. So a line is a hard line. This is not going to happen in the game. It doesn't even necessarily exist in the world. This is not going to be brought up in the game ever. A veil is something that can happen in the world, but we're not going to talk about it. It's we're going to pan, we're going to fade to black. We're going to pan to the next scene, right? This was a really great start, but the problem is that you have to front load it. You have to think about everything that might come up for you in a game, and that's really hard. I myself have actually been triggered by stuff that's come up in a game and had a bad experience with it. I played online and I had my headphones on, and our dungeon master said something, and I took my headphones off and chucked them across the room. Luckily, one of my friends who was in the game checked it and was like, "You okay?" I'm like, nope. I was not expecting that in the game, and so because I wasn't expecting it, I didn't make it one of my lines. It was like, that will never come up, and it did. And so in response to that, there is the X card. So this is typically a card that's on the table, or for online games, you just send the letter X as a private message to your game master, and it means full stop, we've crossed a line, we need to go to something else. And so that just completely ends the scene that you're in, and you'll move to something else. A lot of people don't like that because you're just completely disrupting the flow of play, and it doesn't necessarily address the issue. So the Luxton technique was the next one that came out. And the idea here was when you put your hand on the X card, what you said was what you needed out of the scene. So an example, a very common trope is the child is kidnapped by trolls or something, and you have to go rescue the child. And so, you might just say something like, "Hey," I put the hand on the X card, "I'm cool with us doing this mission. There being danger, but no matter what, I need the kid to be okay. No matter what happens, that kid doesn't die, that kid gets out okay." And then that's a way to, for people to advocate for themselves, for their own needs, and for the game to adapt to what is needed in the moment. I've made up my own version of this that I call dynamic safety tools, and that's these lovely little buttons that I made. Aren't they great? Aren't I just so creative? It's essentially a way for us to utilize the different methods. Sometimes I do a vibe check, so I like to make my games creepy at times. And when players get really into it, again, these games are immersive, so they're sitting at the table, their eyes are big, they're kind of clenched up. And I don't know, it's like, are you actually afraid, or are you just immersed in the experience right now? So I might do a vibe check. And so the green smiley face is like, yeah, I'm good. I'm role playing. I'm in the immersive experience. I'm having a good time. Yellow is, I'm fine for right now, but we're kind of getting near to a boundary for me. And so that way I can more naturally pivot the story. The red X is, yep, we've crossed the line, we need a full stop, we need to process what's going on. And then the blue pause button is one that I like a lot because it allows for just a pause of the narrative so we can ask a clarifying question about rules, we can ask for a bio break, or the most common reason that pause has been pushed in my games is, I don't remember why we're here. What are we doing? What's our mission again? And it's a chance for us to kind of catch up and make sure everybody's on the same page. There is a really awesome resource for this that's completely free, Monty Cook's Consent in Gaming. If you go onto Monty Cook's website, it's a free PDF. You have to add it to your cart and buy it, but it's free. It's completely free. It's a wonderful resource that goes into all of these techniques much more if you want to learn about it. Now, the best intentions sometimes don't have the best results. So I personally do have some concerns around safety tools. There is a lot of social pressure at the table. If you're sitting at the table and you see everybody smiling and having a good time, it can be really hard to disrupt that, especially even if you're feeling triggered, right? Also, then, are they actually being used? I've used them a number of times, and like I said, I've had the meh face used twice at all my games, and the pause button used fairly frequently because that's when I need to use the bathroom or I need a rules clarification question. Other than that, though, the other ones don't tend to be used very much, right? Is this actually effective? And do they actually work as intended? And so this would be where we would go to the research. Unfortunately, as with everything for tabletop gaming, the research is lacking. So we just don't know really. Again, looking at social pressure, we can look at some of our more historical studies and things. So I think a lot about Zimbardo and Milgram with this, right? If your game master is the authority in the room and being like, the story's gonna continue, that's not that much different than the experiment must continue, you have to keep pushing the button, even though you've been told that you're giving a deadly shock to somebody right now. Right? And so it is a really hard thing to do, but also I can imagine this is going to be a nightmare to try and study, because in order to know if somebody's using these tools, we have to put them in a situation where they would use them. And so that's saying, okay, come communicate to me what your boundaries are, tell me what the things are that you don't want, and then I'm going to intentionally put them in a game to see if you use these tools. Right, and then I'll ask you interview questions after about it, and we all know that the interview questions after, we will justify our behavior to make it fit our own narrative to alleviate the cognitive dissonance. So, this isn't to say it can't be studied, it'll be very difficult, but it is something that is lacking and something to be aware of. There's a couple of awesome tools out there for utilizing safety, these communication devices and safety tools. So pictured here is the deck of player safety. I really like this one because it's anonymous and it's quick. You give everybody an empty envelope and a bit of the deck. They go through the stack of deck they have, they pick one card, they put it in the envelope, one or more cards. And then they pass it through until everybody's seen all of the deck. And then the envelopes are passed to the game master. Game master shuffles up the envelopes, takes the cards out, shuffles up the cards, and puts them out on the table. And what's out on the table now are our lines. These are the things that are not going to be in the game at all. It's completely anonymous, we don't know who put it out there, and so it's just a really great way for us to quickly get through that, especially if you're doing a game at like a convention or a one-shot or something. Again, once you go to consent in gaming. Another awesome resource, especially anybody who is doing any fiction writing, it's a website called Writing the Other. On this website, they interview people with a wide range of experiences, from physical disabilities to different cultures, and it's asking interview questions so that you can understand what their experience might be in the world, and so that you can understand that and write from that, again, with building empathy and trying to engage with things. So I'm going to quickly go over some more recent research that we've had, and then I want to leave us about 15 minutes for questions and discussion. So, Athorn and others, 2024, we're specifically looking at autism and playing tabletop role-playing games, and they did find that it seems to be beneficial. This was a qualitative study, so sort of proof of concept, but it did show that there was some gain that was seen, and it seemed to be significant. Uvalde and others, 2024, did a meta-analysis of current research. I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, they were able to look at 15 studies. It's incredibly understudied, so this is something that really needs to be looked at. But looked at some cultural and ethnic shortcomings of tabletop role-playing games that I think is very important. There's a lot of biases and problematic themes that keep getting carried forward in these games, and it's important to understand those as well. Slaughter and Others 2023, it was a case study where they were looking at adults and their understanding of reality through building characters, which it was pretty interesting to look at. Don't know how much it would drive the needle forward. But again, it is just kind of a neat look at that. Herman 2022, which I think overall structure of tabletop role-playing games, and kind of the underpinning psychological and philosophy that looks at every different aspect of play. So looking at what can we get, from a psychology standpoint out of exploration, out of combat, out of role-playing. It's a really cool overview to kind of get some ideas of theoretical foundations for this. To Brandon Woodland, so they were looking at LGBTQ plus populations, and one of the things that I liked in their study is they found how folks in that community found tabletop gaming to be a really safe place to experiment around and to kind of better understand different issues for themselves. I think when I was a teen, back in my old days, because I'm quite old now, going to high school, it was an experience where people kind of changed their identity a lot. you could be one thing one week and another thing another week, and it wasn't that big of a deal. It feels like for the students that I work with nowadays, it's a really big deal. If you come and say like, I think I am whatever, and then the next week you're like, I thought about it some more and that doesn't fit. That doesn't seem to happen that much anymore. And that's a lot of pressure to get it right, to get your identity right. And what I like about this was it's showing that playing these games can help people figure out their identity, figure out how they want to see the world, what kind of person they want to be. And I think that's just really neat. All right, and then Hannah Miller had a group of 6 people with diagnosed with autism playing tabletop role-playing games, and they were seeing that there was a great benefit in teaching social skills. Their study was disrupted by the pandemic, though, so they weren't able to get the full results that they wanted. So hopefully they've rebooted it and are collecting data again. All right, so some final thoughts before we go to Q&A section. All right, so again, games are a very, very important part of our lives. And we learn a lot about ourselves through play. Play competitive games, play cooperative games, play these tabletop role-playing games. They teach us so much about who we are and how we operate in the world. They are this mirror that gets held up to us in a way that allows us to see ourselves without our defensive walls coming up. And it's fascinating to play in that space and to be in that space. And again, they can likely be a very good tool to build empathy. I would almost feel confident enough to say like they can, but again, we're lacking the research. So that's why I'm saying they're likely. And again, when we are talking about difficult topics, having those in our games, we want to use some sort of communication tool to help people feel supported in saying if they feel uncomfortable or they need something out of the narrative. Right? And so much research is needed. If you are at all interested in research, I think this is such an amazing topic. Even if you're not necessarily super into tabletop role-playing games, but you are into research and the idea of getting published and cited a lot, do this. This field is growing. We're looking for research all the time, and so it's a great place to grow and to develop and to further this field more. All right, I've hit it almost perfectly for questions here. If you want to get my game or my book, you can get 20% off and free shipping from Norton here. For 10 more days, it's 50% off with the audiobook. The audiobook is actually less expensive than the printed book. I don't know how that worked out, but so it's only $10 to get the audiobook, and you're not supporting Amazon with this one.
There's a website, but I think it's in the. You got it?
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so does anyone have any questions about the comment? Yep, we're gonna go to the back.
I have a question. Clinically, when you're evaluating these people for group sessions of Dungeons and Dragons and using all this, how do you kind of preliminarily look at or collaborate with who would fit best with who in what therapy session? Considering that you tailor to such a wide variety of patients or clients, is there a lot of thought process on who would work well in a group together?
Yeah, well, so there's a few things. Like you do want to meet with the person, make sure that you think they're going to jive with whoever's in the group already. But for clinical groups, you have group goals, right? And so those are known and it's part of the advertising for the group. And so like people who need to work on those things will come to the group. It's like, I don't need to learn assertiveness communication, therefore why would I go to the assertiveness communication group, right? And so that's a big part of it, is being very clear with what your group's about and what you're trying to teach through the game. And then people who are more interested in that are going to the referral sources for folks who have access to those people.
Wonderful, thank you. Am I allowed to ask one
Yep.
more question?
Yes.
And just quick, what is, if you had to give a percentage, what percentage of keeping it fun and then keeping it clinical are part of these games, since, the play aspect, of course, is still very much so in there.
So the fun is clinical, okay, right? And I think that's something that psychology has a very hard time wrapping its head around. I have very intentionally not spoken at any play therapy conventions because I'm very worried that the old guard of psychology will be like, oh, play therapy, it's for children, it's fine. And I want this to be for adults, I want this to be for everybody. Everyone can play across the lifespan, but I'm very worried that if it starts getting lumped in with play therapy, it's not going to be seen as a real therapy, right? And so oh, sorry, I forgot your question.
Percentages.
Huh?
Percentages.
Percentages. Yeah, and so the play, though, is part of the fun, right? My group, so again, we're working on service communication. A lot of the people coming into my group have been bullied. They have been, I had one person, I would call it psychological torture that they had gone through in middle school, of course. And it was just so awful. And so to have these corrective experiences where they can have fun, laugh, and build a bond around the table, that is clinical. It is this moment of somebody who has not been able to get out of this. They're just stuck in here to suddenly relax and open up and reach across the table and go, oh my God, our character should do this. Oh, we should do this thing. Let's do it, right? That, even though it's fun, it is clinical. Now, we do have moments, though, where we stop and we process clinical stuff that's going on. We talk about deep, heavy moments. We talk, like if the characters are in conflict with one another, we'll pause and like, man, your characters are all really mad at each other right now. How do we resolve this? Because it's not, you don't get to break the party apart. You're not going to ghost each other. You all are, in an underwater cave together or something, right? You have to work together. And so we'll talk about that. But I would say, like, if you were to be a fly on the wall at the games that I run, it's not going to necessarily look all that different from other games. My background started off in music therapy. So I'm not a music therapist. I'm very bad at playing guitar. Oh, you lost my thing again. Sorry. That's why I'm not a music therapist. But with the same principle, sometimes you look at kids who are doing a music therapy session and it doesn't look all that different from a music class. But there are different things happening. It's because the music therapist is focusing on behaviors that aren't related to playing music. And in the same way, I'm focused on behaviors that aren't necessarily related to playing the game. So I hope that kind of answered it.
No, it did. Thank you so much.
So, any other questions? Actually, if you don't mind, oh, actually, no, please go ahead.
This was fascinating. I told you before your talk started, I was listening not only as a scholar or a dean, but also as a mom. I'm the mom of a person on the autism spectrum, and just the things you had to say just offered me so many insights to a person I've known for 28 years that I have not had these thoughts about. So first of all, thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
I'm wondering, is there research about the parents of your patients? Because understanding what games, be it the tabletop role-playing games or the other more classical games you started your talk with, offers about predictability and the social skill development, it seems like the parents are a really good partner for the, not in my case therapy, I'm not looking to cure my child in any way, and nor is she looking to be cured, but just to understand that what I think some parents think their teenage children go through is just a phase. Obsession with games could actually really unlock a lot of conversation and supportive dynamics in parent-child relationship, just understanding the importance of what's happening in the brain when they enter the gaming world. Is there research about that?
There is, so again, this has been so understudied. It needs to be, but that's definitely something. Brett, since we have time, we'll real quick do story time. I got to share this with the class that I was in this morning, but I did parent sessions for my groups, just to answer any questions that the parents had. And one of the parents came in and my brain went to, oh God, they're gonna be like, why are you just playing games, what's going on? And they sat down, their kiddo was in my teenager group, or that high school group, and they were saying how they see them with their friends from school. And it's backhanded compliments, gossiping about other people, and just mean-spirited fun. And you see, when those friends would leave, this kid was very just worn out, and not in a good mood. And he's like, and then their D&D friends come over, and they're laughing, and they're telling jokes, and they're lifting each other up. They're celebrating one another's successes. And when those friends leave, my child is energized and happy. And like their question for me was, how do I make all their friends D&D friends? Which I love. I was like, oh, cool, we're doing something good here. But no, the parents definitely are a big avenue. I know that a few different groups have started bringing parents into the sessions after a while and having the parents play like an animal companion to the character of the child to see their kids in this different light. Because I think with autism, it's getting a lot better that we're understanding that folks with autism do want to socialize, they do want to have friends, they do want to do all that stuff. But just reading those nonverbals, reading the room is so difficult. And to see your kid in a social situation thriving is so incredibly powerful. But no, that's definitely more stuff that does need to be researched as well.
So now I get to do my pick question. Now let's go back to your definition of games for a moment.
Okay.
And one thing that I'd like to have people talk about is, how did you get to that definition? So why did that definition become the model for understanding games? What is the game? Yeah.
What is the game? Yeah.
I think I'll go a little bit further. That's the slide.
Or maybe it's the next one.
Well, so I defined role-play games.
Role-play
Tabletop
games, that's what I
role-play
meant, yeah.
Yes. So let me. It's so small on here. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, this is
Yes.
the one.
Yeah, so I was trying to find a definition that would bring all of these aspects together, right? The immersive part, the narrative control, the gaming world, right? Because like we can, we can role play like in our day-to-day lives. Like let's pretend we're, like what little kids will do. Like, oh, let's pretend we're hairdressers. Let's pretend we're this or that, right? There's no rule set around that, and so it's creating that agreed upon world that you have narrative control of the actions, right? Because there's times too where you have games that you don't have narrative control. This is one of my ones that I picked with video games as well. That sometimes you do stuff and like the game requires that this thing happens and so that thing happens, and so you don't actually have control. My partner was playing Red Dead Redemption 2 and I was watching one part, and there was this really like flamboyant character who was up in a hot air balloon, and during this like chase scene that happens, that character dies. I'm like, oh man, that's a bummer. Like, why didn't you save him? And like, it's like there's no that happens. You cannot save that character. What? I don't want to play that game then. That's no fun. I want to be able to save the ridiculous guy in the hot air balloon. So that idea of that narrative control where you do have that impact, that's part of why I use this definition.
We do have time.
Oh, the mic died.
Yeah, there we
There
go.
it is.
So we have time for one more question. If anyone has any. Oh, good.
Thank you. I'm wondering if the non-clinical use of tabletop role-playing games ever lends itself to some of the mean-spirited fun that you discuss in social settings, and if so, how one could work to avoid it absent a clinical professional that helps sort of moderate the discussion.
So meaning that like somebody at the table is being mean-spirited?
Sure, yeah, and all the sorts of problems that you discussed about what happens there.
Yeah, this is where like, it's this interesting thing. Like when you are a game master, even for non-clinical games, like a lot of game masters, like I feel like a therapist. It's like everybody's playing through their own personal trauma. But don't do that. If you play tabletop role-playing games, do not bring your personal trauma into the game. That's not your dungeon master's job. But learning those clear communication skills, like learning how to say, hey, dude, no, we're not doing that, right? Or to just pull people aside and to talk. I recommend the book, I think it's non-aggressive communication styles as a really great resource for learning how to have more of those difficult conversations. Real quick, because we have time, I can talk about one of the early studies that was done. It was a more of an observational kind of pseudo-study where a man was working at an after-school program in the Bronx in the early 1980s. It was for at-risk youth. And one of the activities they started was D&D. And so there were two groups of kids that were playing D&D. And he noticed something, that the kids who were playing D&D had more diverse groups of friends and were better at resolving conflicts than the kids who weren't in the D&D groups. And he started interviewing them and talking to them, and they were talking about how they had learned through playing the game that if everybody played the same character class, they all had the same job, they were not very effective, that they didn't do well in the game. And so they needed everybody to specialize in something different. And they recognized too that in their own lives, it was easier to have friends and they could do better in life by having friends with a diverse skill set. And then they would argue in the games. They would disagree on who got what treasure, what way to go in the dungeon, and in order to progress the story, because remember, again, that definition of game is that we're all invested, we're all interested in this. They were interested in driving the story forward. They took the time to talk it through and resolve it without violence, without getting into a fist fight. And so these kids were getting into fewer fights, they were doing better. And so this guy was like, there is something here in this game, this needs to be studied, we need to do something with it. And then we got the Satanic Panic. And now we're here where it's been 50 years since the creation of D&D, and we really don't have much in the way of research. And we need it, we really do, because it is such an amazing tool.
So that being said, that is the time for tonight. So if we'd all please give Dr. Irene Casteel a round of applause. And thank you for coming to the 3rd annual Irene Casteel Endowed Chair. As a reminder, we have a reception outside, so please have some fruit, punch, and talk with Dr. Connell if you have more questions. But thank you all for coming out tonight.